So we've been reading from chapter 19, and today we're reading 19.2, Sin versus Error. We've been discussing in these last several meetings a shift from an exterior orientation towards reality into a profound interiority. And as we turn inward, we encounter our own thoughts and feelings and use them as filters to interpret each situation according to our own past learning. And these filters fall into two broad categories. Many ways you can express it. One category of faith, the other of faithlessness, of trust or distrust, of hope or despair, and underpinning it all of love or fear. So mistakes happen, and when they are viewed through our filters, they appear either as errors or we judge them as sins. Errors can be corrected, but according to our judgments, sins demand punishment. Here's where forgiveness offers its gentle solution, relieving us of our role as judge. And today, we'll take a closer look at what forgiveness has to offer. Welcome to Miracles on High Plains. I'm your host, Jonaca, and our reader today is Julie C.
It is essential that error be not confused with sin, and it is this distinction that makes salvation possible. For error can be corrected and the wrong made right, but sin, were it possible, would be irreversible. The belief in sin is necessarily based on the firm conviction that minds, not bodies, can attack, and thus the mind is guilty and will forever so remain unless a mind not part of it can give it absolution. Sin calls for punishment as error for correction, and the belief that punishment is correction is clearly insane. Sin is not an error, for sin entails an arrogance which the idea of error lacks. To sin would be to violate reality and to succeed. Sin is the proclamation that attack is real and guilt is justified. It assumes the Son of God is guilty and has thus succeeded in losing his innocence and making himself what God created not. Thus is creation seen as not eternal, and the will of God open to opposition and defeat. Sin is the grand illusion underlying all the ego's grandiosity, for by it God himself is changed and rendered incomplete.
So there are two broad categories that can be used to look at any idea, any set of thoughts or feelings. And in this example, where someone makes a mistake, we can decide whether that mistake is merely an error that can easily be corrected, or if we appoint ourselves as cruel judge, we view the same mistake as a sin and view it as worthy of punishment. Okay, so you might say, what's this have to do with me? Well, we can adopt that stance towards others, but we also use the same stance towards ourselves. And therefore, it's what they call in A Course in Miracles a double-edged sword. That which you judge in others, you will also judge in yourself. And so this becomes a form of self-diminishment, self-criticism, and its extreme form is self-hatred. So these would all be viewed as mistakes. And the biggest mistake, this is perhaps the most important idea that was shared tonight. The biggest mistake is thinking that we are to be the judge of others, or that we are to be the judge of ourselves. That's where it originates, the assumption that my role is to judge. And then, based on that assumption, the application of it is to judge cruelly or to judge. Well, we'll get to forgiveness as a form of judgment. We'll get to that in just a moment. But for right now, we want to recognize the implications of using the ego's form of judgment and how much that can cause us to suffer. Sandra?
Oh, I'm so familiar with this because the fertile ground in which all of this takes place is when I take things personally. I'm sorry for the bark. Did you hear that? Oops.
Yeah. We're good?
Yeah.
Yeah, okay, thanks. Yes. So, a double-edged sword, if you assume you are to be the judge and use your mind as a weapon to find faults in others, the same process will be used to look at yourself and find faults with yourself, leading to ultimately self-hatred. This is the religion of the ego, is that you would spend your entire life unhappy with yourself and therefore unhappy with life. And we want to put up, what is it when a road is under construction, there are warning signs and guardrails put up so you won't drive off into the construction work. Well, we need to do that with our thoughts about mistakes so that we don't unconsciously drive off into the zone where we think we're correct in being the judge of other people's issues, and then lead that all forming the basis of our own unhappiness. So, Noelle?
Sometimes I confuse error with sin. How do I tell the difference?
Excellent question. And if you're taking notes, write that down. How do I distinguish between error and sin? We're going to jump ahead a little bit here since Noelle asked the question right away. The temptation, what not to do, first of all, is to still think that you're to be the judge of what is an error and what is a sin. That puts you right back in the seat of judgment. What we will learn is that the Holy Spirit is a loving, gentle, divine and merciful judge of all of the errors of time and space, and that we look to the Holy Spirit to be the judge, and she always judges us as innocent. So we look to her guidance to discern what is an error. Yes. Taking up, which all is for one purpose, and this is a gigantic ask, is that we no longer be the judge ourselves. The entire Course of Miracles, the ability to enter into the light of grace, where peace and truth and love are abundant, hinges around our willingness to relinquish the role of judge. And how are we to do that in a world where decisions need to be made? Well, we follow Holy Spirit's judgment. Let's go on, and then we'll take some more comments as we get into it a little further.
The Son of God can be mistaken. He can deceive himself. He can even turn the power of his mind against himself, but he cannot sin. There is nothing he can do that would really change his reality in any way, nor make him really guilty. That is what sin would do, for such is its purpose. Yet for all the wild insanity inherent in the whole idea of sin, it is impossible. For the wages of sin is death, and how can the immortal die? A major tenet in the ego's insane religion is that sin is not error, but truth. And it is innocence that would deceive. Purity is seen as arrogance, and the acceptance of the self as sinful is perceived as holiness. And it is this doctrine that replaces the reality of the Son of God as his Father created him and willed that he be forever. Is this humility? Or is it rather an attempt to wrest creation away from truth and keep it separate?
Mm-hmm. So we have two narratives that are going on here. Narrative of the ego. This is the whole idea of sin, the religion of the ego's insane religion, that narrative. And we have the narrative of the Holy Spirit that would be completely opposite in every way. So let's be aware that both, and as we move from one to another, we'll point it out. The truth is that your spirit, we have to not confuse the levels here. We're talking about the part of that God created you eternal, like himself, whole, pure, and holy. That part cannot be mistaken because of its source. We're not saying your mind can never be mistaken. We're saying your being, your essential nature can never be mistaken. But your mind can deceive yourself and even turn the power of your mind against yourself. Notice the difference in levels. Your essential nature, your eternal nature cannot be mistaken, but your mind can even attack itself. Difference in levels, their different properties belong to the two different levels. And yet, even if your mind does attack itself, what does the implication does that have for your spirit? None. There's nothing you or I can do that would really change our reality in any way, nor make your spirit guilty, so to speak, make your spirit ineligible to be a part of the union of all things. So, in all this wild insanity, the whole idea of sin, which should be viewed as the ego's religion, is not a part of the narrative the Holy Spirit holds. To the Holy Spirit, the idea of sin is impossible. So that's one narrative. Now let's contrast that. Course in Miracles teaches by contrast. So let's contrast that with the ego's narrative. A major tenet is that sin is truth. That when a person, so we're going to use an example in just a moment. Thou shalt not kill. And let's say somebody kills someone. We'll use that as an example in just a moment, because that's a pretty powerful example. A major tenet in the ego's religion is that people are sinners. That's the truth. And the notion that we are innocent souls is a deception. So it's an exact contradiction, where a pure soul, a holy encounter, a holy innocence is seen as arrogance, and the acceptance of this self as sinful is perceived as the ultimate reality. Okay, it's a doctrine. And I imagine you've heard this doctrine somewhere else in this lifetime. This doctrine about sin and arrogance. And so this is the ego's attempt to wrestle creation away from truth and keep it separate. So why, this is not fun to talk about, really. Why would we even want to talk about it? So that we cannot be confused in our mind, so that the Holy Spirit can teach us to distinguish when these thoughts arise in your mind, so that you recognize them. This goes back to Noel's question of distinguishing error from sin. I assure you that in the next year of time, if not sooner, some thoughts about that will cross your mind. And then the question is, how will you respond to that? And if you learn to distinguish as the Holy Spirit would teach you, you would realize that these person that commits a most grievous error, such as murder, when we are not condoning murder, is their spirit is not condemned as a result of the terrible actions that their mind and body have taken. Their spirit remains forever a part of the union of all creation, but their mind has turned the power of their mind against themselves and against others. And that can be corrected. Okay, so let's take some comments. Sandra?
So once again, the ego wants me to take it personally, because when I take things personally, then I get angry, really angry, and then I want revenge. And if I don't take it personally and I just see it as an innocent mistake, or even in the case of murder, I might, if I don't take it personally, I can see maybe that person who was driven to that point had some kind of wound or something. They took something personally, which is why they did such a heinous act. But if I don't take it personally, then it's simply a mistake, and I can correct it. And it's usually Now with the Course in Miracles, not only is it simply a mistake, but it was put there on purpose by God, because it's my salvation. If I look at it like, okay, here's my opportunity to heal a part of myself that's wounded. Instead of taking it personally, I can use it as an opportunity to heal a part of myself that's wounded. And then I can be grateful to the person who brought it to me, because they're showing me the parts of myself that I need to heal. I'm complete.
Mhm. Yeah, I want to build on an idea that Sandra shared about not taking it personally and use an example, because this is a course in mind training. These things, what Sandra said is correct. Don't get all wrapped up in the emotions and carried away by it. Don't take it personal. But still, we must train our minds so that in the intensity of the moment, we don't forget all that and get caught up just the same. And so here's one form that has been practiced for thousands of years, and that is to learn to sit quietly and I guarantee you thoughts, without you're putting forth any effort at all, seemingly, thoughts will cross your mind, even though your purpose, your intention is to sit perfectly quiet and think about nothing. Think not, no thoughts, no feelings, no activity whatsoever. Regardless of that, a bunch of thoughts will rise up and cross your mind. And the training is to learn to not grab on to those thoughts and feelings. And we use metaphors like jump on the train to not get caught up in the vortex of those thoughts and feelings, but just let them drift on by. This is not taking it personally. This is letting it go. And the mind, an untrained mind, the beginning of the introduction to the workbook says, an untrained mind can accomplish nothing. And so the mind has to be at some level trained so that we don't continue to get all personal about things that shouldn't be taken personal, so that we don't get emotionally activated every time a certain situations happen, but we learn to let things pass. And people spend years in practice just to learn to do that. So, and the workbook lessons will guide you step by step along a path that helps you develop that practice for yourself. Okay, so learn to let it go and not become wrapped up. Because if you let your mind run freely, then the ego will offer up all sorts of ideas that will result in your feeling angry and resentful and wanting to be the judge of what just happened. We need to learn not to be taken in by that. I think before we finish tonight, we're going to practice that kind of meditation we just talked about. I don't know if right now, let's take another comment. Noel?
Today's lesson is very appropriate. Above all else, I want to see things differently. He gives the examples of physical things, but certainly it can apply to what I think I did, how I label it, what I thought, anything, mental and emotional as well.
Yes. And it underscores one of the most essential items here is the power to change your mind. I may have seen things one way initially, so this can apply to what Sandra was referencing. When an event happens that I don't like, there's an immediate response emotionally, perhaps fear or anger or judgment. And above all else, I want to see things differently is a decision on our part to change our mind from that initial instinctual reaction and not be stuck, not be imprisoned by the ego's rage, and instead ask, I can see things differently, not on my own, but with the help of the Holy Spirit. I can learn to forgive and choose again. Let's go on.
Any attempt to reinterpret sin as error is always indefensible to the ego. The idea of sin is wholly sacrosanct to its thought system and quite unapproachable except with reverence and awe. It is the most holy concept in the ego's system, lovely and powerful, wholly true, and necessarily protected with every defense at its disposal. For here lies its best defense, which all the others serve. Here its armor is protection. Here is its armor, its protection, and the fundamental purpose of the special relationship in its interpretation.
Mm-hmm. So this needs some elaboration. First of all, we'll point out that it just is referring to an ego tactic, which is the ego's most holy concept in the ego system. Okay, so this is like pretty big in the ego system. And the context of this is after an event happens to which your judgment has been aroused, and you decide another person is unworthy of love, unworthy of forgiveness, you've judged them. By the way, this can apply to yourself as well, but for purposes of talking, I'm going to act as we'll use the example with somebody else. Same thing is true when you do it to yourself. So we've judged the other as guilty, unworthy of forgiveness. And now our Course in Miracles sense comes back to us. Oh, look what I'm doing. I don't want to do that. That's an ego trap. Let's not do that. Let's change from that judgment to forgiveness. This would be a good direction, yes? To recognize you had made a mistake in judging and now you want to change your mind. Well, guess how the ego is going to react to that? Any attempt to reinterpret what you have judged to be sin as error, the ego will not allow it. The idea of sin is so sacrosanct to its thought system and quite unapproachable. It's in fact, the most holy concept to the ego's thought system is the idea that I should be the judge of sin, again, whether it's somebody else or yourself. So the ego is going to put up a wall of fire around your effort to undo the judgment you just made. I know this experience. I felt this, and it feels like being two people at once. A few minutes earlier, I had judged a person as unworthy of love, and now I'm feeling bad about that. I'm feeling guilty, and I want to forgive, but my mind has already invested in the judgment of the other person as unforgivable. And this is like a knot. Let me say, and so a good question would be, well, then what should you do if you're practicing Course in Miracles? What do you do in that moment? Well, two points. First, try to avoid ever having gotten there in the first place. Pay attention to when you're early on, when your mind starts to veer down the road of judgment as a weapon, immediately recognize how that feels and quickly ask the Holy Spirit for guidance so that you never pump the power of your mind into that belief about sin. So avoid, this is where we talk about the roadway is under construction. We need signs to keep us safe on track and in our lane so that we don't veer off into the danger zone. You need to learn to not let your mind run wild in those kind of moments. So that's the best advice. And but nevertheless, sometimes we do that, and now we're in the ditch. Now we're all upset, and we realize that we've done it to ourselves again. We've made ourselves angry and unhappy and judgmental and snarky, and this can go on for years, right? So we're talking as if you're going to heal from this within 10 minutes, but there's no guarantee that so how to do it quickly is the goal of Course in Miracles, how to save time. And the explicit instructions for exactly what to do here are found in the Song of Prayer. It's a supplement to, it's not in volume 1, 2, or 3 of A Course in Miracles. It's a supplement that's only found in the Foundation for Inner Peace version called the Song of Prayer. And it refers to it as you need a restorative. You need to bring, again, your mind a moment ago was in the ditch of judgment with all that fury that can be aroused in that. And now you're wanting to get back onto a serene place. The Course teaches you need a restorative, which is to be honest. Who is the one that's being the judge here? Who is the one that really needs the correction? I'm the one that got myself all angry and upset about all this. I'm the one that needs to forgive myself and to let forgiveness reign. So that was a quick summary of some of that process found in Song of Prayer. And by the way, Song of Prayer is on the YouTube channel, which appears down in the lower right-hand corner here. Song of Prayer is posted up there. Also, we're going to do the Song of Prayer as a group again at the end of this year. It's really powerful and lovely material. All right, let's take some comments. Bonnie, you had your hand up. Thanks for your patience.
No problem. It seems to me that formalized religion has reinforced this notion through the centuries. to keep people in line, or however they want to have dominion over them. I mean, I grew up in the Catholic faith, and we were certainly told repeatedly we were sinners. And of course, you went to confession to confess all these sins that you had. So it seems like it was a popular tactic in formalized religions. Am I correct?
It would be hard to argue against that. In fact, Bonnie, if a different reading to reinforce what you just said, this is the most holy concept in the ego's thought system. What happened is it entered into other formal thought systems and became enshrined there. So yes, it's one of the reasons why we all know what this is talking about, because it's found it's so widespread.
Yeah, and because you were told it so often and set at a tender age, it is really ingrained in you.
Oh yes. Just as a quick aside, when I was in the first grade, when I would come home, I found that I could go into the supermarket and walk out with a box of Cracker Jacks without being detected. I shoplifted, 6 years old. And at night in bed, I shuddered to think I was going to spend my eternity in hell.
I'm sure.
For my Cracker Jack box heist. And so even at a very young age, and that I was not raised in a formal religious framework, that was not my experience, but I had heard about these things, and everybody does.
Yeah, I was raised by the nuns, and not only did you think you were a sinner, but they cracked you on the knuckles to reinforce that you were a sinner.
There you go. Powerful stories. Let's take some other comments. Heather?
Yeah, I think this is one of the reasons why sometimes the very traditional religions are also very threatened by the Course, is because it challenges that belief directly. You know, that it goes right to the heart of the sacrosanct to their thought system, that if you don't believe Jesus died for your sin and that you're a sinner, then this stuff is hocus pocus. So it just really is one of the most fearful messages, I think, in the Course for people that come from those traditions.
Yeah. Thank you. Sandra?
Yeah, and I am guilty of taking so many things personally, and I bring it to the Holy Spirit. And the Holy Spirit gave me another gift, which is called Ho'oponopono, which really helps me not to take it personally. So I'm sorry, I forgive you, thank you, and I love you. And I've added, I'm sorry for not being the person you wanted me to be. I forgive you for not being the person that I wanted you to be. Thank you for showing me the parts of myself that I need to heal. And I love you for that. I'm complete.
Very nice. Thank you. Noelle?
That's a beautiful prayer, Sandra, and I really like how you customized it. I wanted to say that as I participate in these meetings, I discover that more and more people who follow the Course were raised as Catholics. And I really admire all of you so much, because the Course is so opposite of that indoctrination and all the rituals, as comforting as sometimes they may be. But the mindset, of course, the multiple mindsets are so different. And sometimes listening to people who've been raised as Catholics and even who sometimes continue to go to Mass, they are some of the most loving and forgiving people that I've met.
Truly. It's a wonderful example of the power to change your mind, to have been raised in one strong teaching system and then deciding later on that you know that no longer serves you, that you're going to change your mind. Okay, let's go on.
It can indeed be said the ego made its world on sin. Only in such a world could everything be upside down. This is the strange illusion that makes the cloud of guilt seem heavy and impenetrable. The solidness that this world's foundations seem to have found, is found in this. For sin has changed creation from an idea of God to an ideal the ego wants, a world it rules, made up of bodies, mindless and capable of complete corruption and decay. If this is a mistake, it can be undone easily by truth. Any mistake can be corrected if truth be left to judge it. But if the mistake is given the status of truth, to what can it be brought? The holiness of sin is kept in place by just this strange device. As truth, it is inviolate, and everything is brought to it for judgment. As a mistake, it must be brought to truth. It is impossible to have faith in sin, for sin is faithlessness. Yet it is possible to have faith that a mistake can be corrected.
Mhm. So we learn in the course that there are these two foundations of thought, foundations that we believe to be reality. One is the ego or the world's foundation, where we refer to the solidness of the world's foundation seems to have it seems to be the ego's system. We were just talking about Catholicism and its teaching affects 1 billion people. It seems to have a foundation it's that many people rely on. And what we find, so that's one foundation. And it is the Holy Spirit's purpose to invite you to move over onto a different foundation, to find yourself, your view of life, your view of God, and all relationships, to remove them from the world's foundation and instead replant them on the solid foundation that the Holy Spirit teaches. So how are we going to do that? Well, it's to recognize that those ideas that were taught in the world's foundation are mistakes. And if they are mistakes, they can be undone easily by truth. This is the premise that you can heal. And we're just testified how we witnessed, Noel witnessed, so many people have come from one background and are now healing despite that. It can easily be undone, not by your intellect, not just by reading, but by the power of truth. And the Holy Spirit is the channel, the messenger, the source of that truth to your own mind. And here is a point that I want to make sure we don't miss. In the process, you have to let go of yourself as judge, of believing that it's up to you to decide what's true. It's up to you to decide which foundation is worthy, and instead trust the Holy Spirit's guidance and let the Holy Spirit be the judge. Let truth be left to judge the error, not yourself. Let me say that more simply. Once you recognize something as a mistake, it's not up to you to reinterpret it, to formulate a better story, a better narrative, or some kind of justification. That's not your role. Our role is to accept the gift that the Holy Spirit has, to let the Holy Spirit judge it through the truth that she brings. And so many people have a hard time with this because you're relinquishing your power to be in the judgment seat to the Holy Spirit. And the ego is not going to be pleased with your doing that. So this is where it all turns on this undoing, your willingness to let go the judgments you had made and replace them with truth as the judge. Susie?
I love this sentence. But if the mistake is given the status of truth, to what can it be brought? Last night I had some definite mistakes in my thinking, and my ego, or I, or Susie, was pretty agitated. I was grateful that I knew that, but now, as opposed to before the course, I knew it was a mistake in my mind. You know, it wasn't the truth. And I love this because in the past, where do I go? Where did I go? But I went to the ego's belief system and kept becoming, you know, I kept myself as a victim or blaming. And last night I was able to say, I have some mistaken thinking. I do have somewhere it can be brought to the Holy Spirit. And then the reason I know it's not the truth, because truth is the same. There's no opposite, right? And today my thinking is 180 degrees different, you know, and there was a lot of healing that took place in my mind and my thoughts because I was able to recognize it. It's just an error, it's a mistake, and I'm going to the Holy Spirit. And so I love that sentence right there. Anyway, this is great. I love it. Thank you.
Thank you. So let's shift just for a moment. Oh, wait a minute. That's not the end. Okay. So these are some historic images. Some of you might immediately recognize this happens to be the Berlin Wall. Okay. But it's not the Berlin Wall as it stood for 40 years. It's the Berlin Wall being torn down. Bear with me, you'll see how this relates in a minute. Well, now there's a park where the wall was. And there's a memorial to what was, but no longer is. An impenetrable wall, a wall for which if you attempted to cross it, you could wind up being killed, is now a park. And people of the same heritage, in this case, we're talking about German-speaking people, live together on both sides of the park, no separation. So, what's that got to do with anything? Well, see if you can connect the dots.
There is no stone in all the ego's embattled citadel that is more heavily defended than the idea that sin is real, the natural expression of what the Son of God has made himself to be and what he is. To the ego, this is no mistake, for this is its reality. This is the truth from which escape will always be impossible. This is his past, his present, and his future, for he has somehow managed to corrupt his father and change his mind completely. Mourn then the death of God whom sin has killed, and this would be the ego's wish, which in its madness it believes it has accomplished.
Mm-hmm. So, the ego has its own religion. And a couple people testified that, wow, some of those messages have made them in many of the world's major religions pretty widespread. And of all of the messages within that, there is none that is more heavily defended than this idea that sin is real, that it's justified. This is all related to the idea, and therefore you being the judge of it makes perfect sense. This is the ego's religion. It wants you to retain this role of judge. And as we said, just as the finger that points in judgment outward has three fingers pointing back at oneself, so that role of judgment is a treacherous one. And yet, even though of all the stones in the ego's citadel that is heavily defended, even its walls can be torn down in your mind. The wall of separation, the wall of belief in your right to be judge of others can be torn down if you're willing to have it undone. Didn't we read just a moment ago that if it's a mistake, it can easily be undone by truth? Okay, we are moving ahead.
Would you not rather that all this be nothing more than a mistake, entirely correctable, and so easily escaped from, that its whole correction is like walking through a mist into the sun? For that is all it is. Perhaps you would be tempted to agree with the ego that it is far better to be sinful than mistaken. Yet think you carefully before you allow yourself to make this choice. Approach it not lightly, for it is the choice of hell or heaven.
Mm-hmm. So I think that it's given the widespread foundation, the enormity of the ego's walls and citadels and its defense mechanisms, that it would not be shocking if you would be tempted to agree with the ego. Therefore, if you find yourself ensnared in that, be kind to yourself, be gentle, know that that happens. It's simply a mistake, and that mistakes can easily be undone if you let the voice of truth guide you back into the path of forgiveness and of innocence. These are important choices because really each and every day you are confronted in some form or another with this choice. As it says, approach it not lightly, for in this choice, your mind either enters into the peace of heaven or gets ensnared in the chaos of hell. It's a choice. And once you learn to distinguish the road signs along the way, then it's really only one choice really makes any sense. The other one is a choice for insanity. Noel?
Why would I be tempted to agree that it is far better to be sinful than mistaken? Seems to be mistaken is less serious than sinful.
Remember, we're talking pure ego religion right now. You'd be tempted to join with the ego to believe that. So let's say, as an illustration, Noel, maybe you can relate. Let's say I was trained in a seminary that all have sinned, all are sinful. Sin has spread throughout the world, and that's my religion. Would it not be tempted to believe that rather than things are a mistake? Yes, it's a matter of standing. The issue here is, what foundation do we stand on? Are we standing on the foundation that the ego would foster, or are we standing on the foundation that truth would foster? Truth sees everything as a mistake, not as sin. But know that it can be very tempting. You might be tempted to agree with the ego in that belief that others are guilty of unforgivable sin. And if you get ensnared in that, realize that even that is a mistake that can be undone by truth. You have to let yourself off the hook. So let me share one more thing here. I'm going to make this an anonymous story, but it's about a person who, having raised his children imperfectly, having made mistakes as a parent, we're talking about decades past, still carries the weight of guilt on his shoulders for imperfect parenting. Now, I'm being kind when I call it imperfect parenting. He would probably be much more descriptive of that. But to him, that those things that transpired in the past, he is not yet forgiven. And he carries the weight, the burden of that belief on his shoulders, rather than the other option available to him is to realize that he made a mistake. He was an imperfect parent who made a mistake, and there's nothing that he can do to change that past. We can only do our best from this point forward, and thus free himself from the ancient prison that would keep us forever mourning the past. It's a heavy I'm just now speaking more general. When people do these things to themselves, it's a heavy burden we carry for not letting mistakes go and instead investing in the belief that they have these lasting, unforgivable consequences. All right, couple comments, Bonnie?
I was thinking about the individual at the other end of the spectrum that hears this message about these are mistakes, they can be corrected, and just keeps going on mistakes. Oh, it's just a mistake, it can be corrected, and they just keep in that vein. I don't know. How does a person climb out of that thinking?
Yeah. Well, one, that would be their choices to make, a willingness to admit our mistakes. Many people are not yet ready to admit their own mistakes. But you're right. In order to be honest with yourself, you have to be willing to admit you're mistaken and to dethrone the judge and instead humbly come before the truth. Noel?
In your seminary example, I can understand how it would be easy to side with the idea of sin because so many people around me when I'm in seminary adhere to that. I want to be one of the group. I want to be accepted. And that, I suppose, can go for any community, any set of beliefs.
Yes.
So it's would be quite difficult to go against the consensus.
Yes, it would be. And think of the courage that anyone has to depart from their religion of origin and seek out other ideas that are not taught within the religion of their origin. It takes great courage. Almost everybody on this call has, in one form or another, walked that path. Heather?
There's also a lot of reinforcement in those traditions that there's someone of intermediary that can absolve you of your sin. So there's a great deal of emphasis put on that. So people have a lot of attachment to that idea that a person, a priest, or someone can forgive me of my sin. So that, that's very much reinforced so that then I can be absolved. If I made a mistake, I can't pardon myself. But if I believe in these traditions, somebody can pardon me. So there's very reinforced that now I can go free because I confessed, and that person has the power. It's an external power. It's not the power of the Holy Spirit.
Yes. Yes. Thank you. Sandra?
Yes, and the mass consciousness has judged mistakes as being bad instead of an opportunity for learning.
Right. Okay, my friends, this might be a little difficult for some people, the material we just covered, but the intent is to learn to distinguish what is a very embedded concept in our world and to be able to see it in an entirely new light, a reinterpretation according to the Holy Spirit. I'll remind you, all mistakes can easily be undone by the truth. Let truth be the judge, not you and I. And the Holy Spirit's guidance can easily undo those mistakes. So that's it for tonight. Thank you for your attention to that. Lindsay, it was really nice to have you join us today. I hope you enjoyed that, and look forward to seeing everyone again real soon. Namaste.
Namaste. Thank you, Julie, for
Thank you,
reading.
Julie.
Thanks,
Thank you, everybody.
everyone.
Jonica.
Thanks.
Namaste.
Thank you, Julie. Thank you, Jonica.
Thank you.
Good night, everybody.
Night.
Good
You're
night.
welcome. Good night, everybody.
Good night, Kelly.
Good night, Jonica.
Thanks for reading.